In this video, I will be teaching you the basics of how to create your very own levels for Frog Hop. The first thing you'll have to do is make sure that you have the Level Editor DLC installed. You can check out the previous video if you haven't done that already. Next, you'll want to open up the Tiled Editor. Make sure you have the Frog Hop project open. This may be done automatically, but if not, click the Open Project button and go browse out to wherever you have Frog Hop installed, and you should find the tiled project inside the level editor folder. All right, now let's get started. On the left-hand side, you'll see several folders, which include all the different objects you'll need to create your levels. And there's also some other behind-the-scenes stuff that you don't need to worry about too much. So let's open up the levels folder. And inside here, you'll find examples, which are pretty much a one-to-one replica for the official levels in the game, for the first world, and even a level from the second world. The demos folder shows off specific design techniques with annotations to kind of spell it out. The layers demo is pretty similar to what we will be covering in this video, so I suggest taking a look at it after watching the video if you need a practical reference. For the purposes of this video, we'll be starting from scratch. We need to make a new map file, which has the extension tmx. You'll see that over here. Technically, we could do this from the tiled menu and create a new map, but there are a lot of settings which are a lot easier to get right if we start with a template. So instead, whenever you start a new map, open up the empty template. And let's do a save as. In order to make it easy to share levels with other people, I suggest creating a folder with your nickname, and then inside that, put another folder for what you want the level to be called. You can change the name of this later, so don't worry about it too much if you're not sure what to call your level. Sometimes the folders don't show up right away here, so if that happens to you, you can always go up to Project and hit Refresh Folders. Now let's go and open up the new file we created. Now you'll notice on the right-hand side, there are several layers that are included with the template. There are two kinds of layers we will use for the purposes of making Frog Hop levels: object layers and tile layers. The tile layers are denoted with a grid icon, while object layers have this funky shape. Some layers are invisible and/or locked, which you can toggle with the eye and the lock icons respectively, but I generally recommend leaving them as is for how they are set up in this template. For simplicity's sake, you can think of tile layers as basically terrain. A tile provides a visual, but the player can't interact with it in any way. Everything else should be an object. So let's start by opening the tile sets folder, and we can start placing some terrain. You can just pick one of these for any of the worlds. And you can see this is the grassy world, the first world. And now that that's open, you'll notice down here in the bottom right under tile sets, the tile set we selected shows up here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. First, we're going to select a layer that we want to place our tiles on. Normally, you'll use the tiles layer. Let's select a tile and start placing some down. And I can just overwrite any of the ones I drew before with a different tile. Select the eraser up here to remove anything you want to get rid of, or press the E hotkey. Now that we've placed some blocks, you can close this tile set up here, and it will stay over here in the tile set section because it knows that you've used it in this map. Next, we want to add the player. So let's just drill down into the Objects folder and look for buddies. Now we can just select Hoppy here, and we're going to place him in the level, but we need to place him as an object. So let's select the objects layer, and now we have all these different toolbar options. When you're placing objects from a tile set, you need to select the Insert Tile toolbar option. Now let's place Hoppy down here. Before I go any further, I should mention a couple of options in Tiled, which will make the design process go a little bit smoother. In the View menu, under Snapping, select Snap to Grid. FrogHop has a very pixelated design, and it looks best when most of the objects are placed aligned with the grid. You can still move objects individually, pixel by pixel, if you really have to, but that's going to be the exception rather than a rule, so it's easiest to just leave the grid snapping on. Also, under the Map menu, turn on Auto Map while drawing. Auto mapping is a bit complicated, but basically it's a little bit of magic that makes the design process easier by automating some of the legwork so you don't have to do everything manually. The auto mapping should run whenever you save a map, but turning this on will allow certain automation to run as you're drawing tiles to give you that immediate visual feedback that you wouldn't otherwise get. Let's take a look at an example of this now. First, I'm just going to deselect this object here, and I'm going to go back to the tiles. Over here, we have a pit that spells utter doom for our friend Hoppy. To provide the player with a warning, pits should have this indicator tile, but you'll notice that there are actually two of them because the pattern needs to alternate. Now, you could select both of them and place them down two at a time, but thanks to auto mapping, you don't have to. Just select the first tile, then click and drag, and it will automatically alternate between those two tiles. Let's turn auto mapping off so you can see what it looks like if you don't do that. Notice how the pattern gets a little bit messed up at the edges because it's supposed to alternate, but it doesn't with just that single tile. Turn auto mapping on, and we get a nice clean look. I'm just going to erase these now. So far, we've been placing in the layer called tiles, but there's actually more than one tile layer. In terms of usable layers for these FrogHop levels, there are actually three main tile layers and a special one. The other layers you see here are related to some hand waving that the auto mapping does, which you don't need to worry about. The three layers we'll be concerned with are tiles, tiles back, and tiles front. They work mostly the same, but gives you a little bit of freedom for aesthetic design. For instance, some areas you might want to put a background. Now, if I try to place this tile here on top of the pit, it gets rid of it. Let me just undo that. But if I place it in the tiles back layer, now we can have a nice background. When you save the map, you'll notice these black boxes appear. This indicates collision boxes, and it's something that the auto mapping creates so that you don't have to manually. Notice that it creates collisions for the floor and the wall that I placed on the tiles layer, but it doesn't create any for the tiles on the tiles back layer. This way you can easily use it for a background that you don't want the player to collide with. Auto mapping is only going to work on the tiles back, and tiles front layers. So it's important that you try to stick to these layers as much as possible as opposed to creating your own tile layers. By default, try to create your tiles on the tiles layer. And if you need something to be in the foreground, you can use tiles front. If you need it in the background, put it into tiles back. Pretty straightforward. The collision boxes that I mentioned are actually in this ground layer. So you can toggle the visibility if you want to get a better look of what your level looks like in game. You can always toggle it back on if you need to troubleshoot some collision issues. So what about that special layer that I mentioned earlier? Well, that would be where modifiers come in. Basically, tiles placed in this layer are not intended to be visible, but instead modify the way the auto mapping works in order to create the desired outcome. The most common example can be seen with this X tile. I'm going to turn the ground layer back on for this example. If we place an X tile over the top of a ground tile and then save the map, you can see it doesn't create a collider in that block. This can be useful for creating fake walls. The other main use for modifiers is for creating flowing water. Let's try placing some tiles in the tiles layer. And now let's go to modifiers and put one of these arrows on top of it. Save the map. And now we have flowing water. The box around these indicate that this has been converted to an object which will create the water flowing to the right as we designed it. You can actually do a little bit of a shortcut with these water arrows by just placing the tile directly on the tiles layer. And then when you save, the auto mapping will convert it so that the modifier goes into the modifiers layer, and then the tile is actually just the water tile. Let's erase this right now and save it. That should get rid of those objects that were floating there left over from the old auto mapping. You may wish to disable the water visibility similar to how we disabled ground earlier, as it's not something you're going to see in the game. And this is pretty much it as far as understanding layers is concerned. But there are a couple more things to cover before we finish up our map. First of all, we're getting pretty cramped in this small space, so we'll want to expand the map size. You can do this at any time by going to Map, and then Resize Map. Adjust the height and width as desired, and maybe even set the offset depending on where you want the tiles you've already placed to be in the whole level. Now you may notice that the background doesn't quite adjust when we change the size of the map. Strictly speaking, this won't be an issue in game. It's just going to tile across the top regardless. But we haven't talked about how to change the background. So let's do that now. Begin by selecting the background layer, and now select the tile set backgrounds. You can see the list of backgrounds here, and you'll want to pick one out that suits the world your level is designed for. Now that we've selected the correct layer, you'll notice this new tool is available called Set Background. Switch to that, click anywhere in the map, and bam, it's tiled correctly all the way across the level. You can do this anytime you resize the map, but like I said, it's not really necessary unless you want to change the design of your background. Now let's just place a few more objects to flesh out our level a little bit. A platform is really great for crossing gaps. So let's open the platforms tile set. Now let's go over here, and we can select one of these moving platforms. Place it in the level. Now you'll see the left and right arrows on the platform, but how does it know where to stop? Well, that's where invisible objects come in. You'll want to open up the Invisibles tile set. And this orange block here is what we use to stop moving platforms. Go ahead and place a couple of those in your level where you want the platform to stop. If you're trying to design a full-fledged level, you'll probably want to include 3 to 5 gems as well. Half of the fun in completing levels is finding all the secrets, so be creative with your gem placement. You'll find the gems in the Pickups tile set. Now you'll notice that these gems appear in multiple different colors, but that doesn't actually reflect how they will appear in the game. The appearance of the gems depends on the world that your level is in. But the reason that they have different colors in the designer here is because gem order is deterministic in Frog Hop. For instance, the leftmost gem here is always gem number 1, regardless of where you put it in the level. But as a general rule, you should try to place the earlier gems earlier in the level. Now let's just do a couple more things to finish this up. Place a little bit more ground. Let's open the Key Objects tile set. This has the flag which marks the finish of the level. And that's all there is. We'll save our map. And oops, I've got something weird going on here. So you'll notice these ground pieces are not creating the collision. That's because I forgot about the water we used to have here with the modifiers. That's going to mess up our auto mapping, so we just need to get rid of that. There we go. Now we've got some good ground. Let's go ahead and test this out. By default, there should be a command to test the level, but you may need to change the path depending on where you have Frog Hop installed. Go over to the Commands menu, and if we go to Edit Commands, on the Project Commands tab, there you have Test Level. Change this to wherever you have Frog Hop installed, but bear in mind, if it has spaces in it, you need to put the quotes around it. It's going to get rid of the quotes if you click to browse out, so remember to add that back in. Once you're all set, you can either set a hotkey and press that, or you can go and select it from the menu over here. Now Steam might ask you with this prompt, and you'll just have to say OK. There we are. This is our level. You can see how the gems have all changed to be the same color, and our moving platform is moving across just exactly how we placed those blocks at the ends. Looks like the flag isn't showing up. So let's exit and go back and see what happened there. I'm guessing that we placed it in the wrong layer. Yep, looks like I placed it in the tiles layer. Now remember what I said earlier, that tiles cannot be interacted with. So that's why we have to place it in the objects layer. Place it there, save, and now let's run it again. There we go. And that's it for this tutorial. These are the basics for designing a level. The next 2 lessons will cover properties, which are essential for customizing certain aspects and fine-tuning, and worlds, which allow you to connect maps together for multi-map levels.